The crimson dust of Earth's final colony swirled through the air as Commander Vexara's boots crushed the remnants of human civilization beneath her feet. Her pale green skin, marked with the ritual scars of 1,000 victories, gleamed dully in the dying light of Terra's weak sun. Red waves of hair, fierce as blood, whipped around her angular face as she surveyed the devastation through the scope of her plasma rifle. "Sector 7 is clear, Commander," her Lieutenant Jackson reported through her comm unit. "No survivors detected." Vexara's jaw tightened. After 40 years of war, after countless genocides committed by both sides, it would finally end here. The last human colony would fall, and the Vilnari could return to their distant star system as the victorious race. "Continue the sweep," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had led armies since she was barely out of adolescence. "Leave nothing standing. No human survives." But as she moved through the skeletal remains of what had once been a thriving settlement, something felt wrong. The usual bitter taste of victory was absent, replaced by an unsettling hollowness. She paused by a collapsed dwelling, its walls bearing the innocent drawings of human children, crude representations of alien monsters with green skin and red hair. Monsters, she thought bitterly, that's all they'll ever see us as. A slight movement caught her peripheral vision. Vexara spun, weapon raised, to find a lone figure emerging from the shadows of a partially collapsed structure. A human male, perhaps in his 30s, stood motionless with his hands visible but not raised in surrender. His clothes were torn, his dark hair dusty with debris, but his posture was strangely calm. "Down on the ground," Vexara barked in accented standard, the common tongue forged during the early days of first contact. "Now." The human didn't comply. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his eyes, an unusual shade of amber, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. There was something in his gaze, something that whispered of familiarity despite the impossibility of such a thing. "I said down," she advanced, finger hovering over the trigger. This was unusual. Humans either fought or cowered. They didn't simply observe. "Vex," his voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Is that really you?" The weapon in her hands wavered. How did he know her name? How did he know the abbreviated form that only her childhood friends had used? A chill ran down her spine as fragmented images flickered through her mind. A small hand reaching for hers, the acrid smell of smoke, the sound of explosions, and laughter. "You're mistaken," she said, but her conviction faltered. "You've never seen me before." Kai, though she didn't yet know his name, smiled sadly. "You had a scar above your left eye in the shape of a crescent, from where the debris hit you when you fell trying to save that human child." Her free hand unconsciously touched the spot where, indeed, a faint silver scar marked her skin. The memory slammed into her with unexpected force. Being thrown clear of an explosion, a human boy standing over her, using his own body to shield her from falling rubble. "No," she whispered, her weapon now pointing at the ground. "That's impossible. You were just a child. He was just a child." "I was 8, Kai confirmed, taking another careful step closer. "You were 6. Your scales were barely developed, and you cried when you thought no one was looking." The world seemed to tilt. Vexara's carefully constructed reality, one where humans were nothing but deceitful murderers, began to crack. Her comm unit buzzed. "Commander, we've detected a life sign in your sector. Shall we eliminate?" She stared at Kai, at this impossible remnant of a memory she thought she'd buried. His amber eyes held no fear, no hatred, only a deep sadness and something else. Recognition, understanding, and perhaps the same confused longing she suddenly felt. "Negative," she heard herself say. "False reading, continue your sweep." As her team's acknowledgement crackled through the comm, Vexara found herself lowering her weapon completely. Whatever was happening here, whatever strange twist of fate had brought them together again, she knew with absolute certainty that her mission had just become infinitely more complicated. "We need to talk," she said finally, though her warrior's instincts screamed that she was making a catastrophic mistake. Kai nodded, relief washing over his features. "Yes, we do." As twin suns began to set over the ruins of what had once been humanity's last hope, the most feared commander in the Vilnari military found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. She holstered her weapon and chose to trust. The war would have to wait. Vexara led Kai through the labyrinthine remains of the colony, her senses hyper-alert despite, or perhaps because of, the strange trust she'd placed in him. They moved in silence until they reached an underground maintenance tunnel that offered temporary shelter from her patrol teams. "Tell me," she demanded once they were settled in the dimness, her rifle still within easy reach. "Tell me everything." Kai leaned against the concrete wall, studying her face with that same unsettling familiarity. "The raid on Outpost Gamma 30 years ago. You were hiding in the storage facility when our forces attacked. I found you crying behind some supply crates." The memory unfurled like a toxic flower in her mind. "My mother was killed that day," she whispered. "She told me to run, to hide, but you—" She shook her head. "Humans murdered my entire family. Why would a human child help me?" "Because you were just a little girl," Kai said softly. "Scared and alone, I couldn't let them find you. I told them I'd already checked that sector." He paused, running a hand through his dust-covered hair. "My father was the garrison commander. When he found out what I'd done, he had me transferred off-planet, said I was too soft for military life." Vexara's green skin flushed slightly as more memories surfaced. "You gave me your jacket. It was blue with some kind of insignia." "Academy Training Corps," Kai confirmed. "You kept shivering in the cold. Then that explosion happened and the ceiling started coming down." They spoke the next words simultaneously. "I thought you died." The air between them crackled with something neither wanted to acknowledge. Vexara found herself noticing details she shouldn't. The way Kai's amber eyes caught the dim light, the gentle strength in his hands, the way he avoided aggressive gestures despite being in the presence of his supposed enemy. "Why are you here?" she asked, forcing herself back to present reality. "This colony was designated for evacuation months ago." Kai's expression darkened. "I came to find something, evidence. There are those on both sides who don't want this war to end." He reached into his pocket slowly, producing a small data chip. "I was a diplomatic attaché before the colony fell. We discovered communications between certain Velnari and human military officials. They've been manipulating both governments, ensuring the war continues." Vexara's hand moved toward her sidearm instinctively. "That's impossible. Our high command would never—" "Would never what? Let personal vendettas and power hunger override the good of their people." Kai's laugh held no humor. "Commander Vexara, respected warrior of 1,000 battles, do you really believe your leaders are incapable of corruption?" The question struck her like a physical blow. How many missions had she led where the intel seemed convenient? How many times had she wondered why they never targeted human military installations, only civilian settlements? "Show me," she said finally. As Kai activated the chip on a battered portable reader, Vexara found herself sitting closer to him than was tactically wise. His warmth was different from the cold efficiency she was used to in her own species. Human body heat radiated life in a way that made her acutely aware of every inch of space between them. The data was damning. Communications between General Krixvan, her own mentor, and a human general named Tors. Plans to prolong the conflict. Coordinated attacks designed to inflame racial hatred. Lists of acceptable losses that made her skin crawl. "My God," she breathed, a human expression she'd never used before. "They've been playing us all along." "Both sides," Kai confirmed, his voice bitter. "My father died believing he was protecting humanity. Your people died thinking they were preserving their culture. Meanwhile, the real planners got rich on weapons contracts and territorial expansions." Vexara's comm unit crackled. "Commander, we've completed the sweep. No survivors detected, awaiting extraction orders." She stared at the device in her hand, then at Kai. In the span of an hour, her entire worldview had shattered. The man before her, this supposed enemy, had risked everything to save her as a child and was now offering her a truth that could save both their peoples. Tell them I'm pursuing a lead," she said into the comm. "I'll meet you at the eastern extraction point at 600. "Acknowledged, Commander. Are you certain you don't require assistance?" "Negative. Maintain radio silence until morning." As she terminated the connection, she became aware of how close she'd moved to Kai. Close enough to see the flecks of green in his amber eyes, close enough to smell the distinctly human scent of him. Not unpleasant, just different. "You're risking everything," he said softly. "For what? A childhood memory and some data that could be fabricated." Vexara looked down at her hands, hands that had taken countless lives in the name of a war that might be nothing but a lie. Maybe I'm finally risking everything for the truth." When she looked up, Kai was studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You grew up beautiful," he said, then flushed slightly. "I mean, I always wondered what happened to the little girl who shared her rations with me even though she was hungrier than I was." Something warm and unfamiliar stirred in her chest. In all her years of warfare, she'd never allowed herself personal connections beyond the bonds of military brotherhood. But sitting here in the darkness with Kai, feeling the weight of shared history and mutual betrayal, she realized how lonely that existence had been. "We should find somewhere safer to spend the night," she said, though part of her wanted to stay in this moment, this strange bubble where everything she'd believed was being rewritten. "I know a place, an old communications outpost about 5 kilometers north." As they prepared to move, Kai touched her arm gently. "Vexara." "Yes. Thank you for not killing me, for listening." She looked at his hand on her arm, pale human skin against her green scales, and something in her core shifted. "Thank me when we both survive what comes next," she said, but her voice was softer than intended. As they ventured back into the dying light of two suns, Commander Vexara realized that saving the human survivor might be the first step towards saving them all. And for reasons she wasn't ready to examine, the thought of anything happening to Kai now filled her with a fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with military strategy. The war wasn't over, but everything had changed. The communications outpost was a relic from the early days of first contact, its walls still bearing hopeful messages in both languages. "Peace through understanding, and united we explore." Now, decades later, the irony was almost painful. Vexara activated the emergency power cells, flooding the small space with dim amber light. The outpost consisted of a single room with basic amenities, a communications console long since dead, emergency supplies, and 2 narrow bunks. "It's not much," she said, suddenly aware of how intimate the space felt. "But it's off the patrol grids." Kai moved to the window, watching the last sliver of sun disappear beyond the horizon. "It's perfect, private, safe." He turned to her, and in the amber light his features seemed to soften. "We need to talk about what we discovered." But as Vexara pulled out the data chip to examine it more thoroughly, her tactical instincts kicked in. "First, we need to establish protocols. My team will expect regular check-ins if I miss them." "I understand." Kai moved closer, pointing to the map displayed on a portable screen. "There's an old maintenance tunnel system that connects to the spaceport. If we can reach it, we might be able to transmit this data to neutral parties on both sides." As they bent over the screen together, Vexara became acutely aware of how close they were. Kai's breath stirred the red waves of her hair, and his shoulder pressed against hers as they traced possible routes. The simple contact sent an unexpected thrill through her that had nothing to do with battle readiness. "Here," she said, trying to focus on the tactical situation rather than the way her skin tingled where they touched. "This maintenance hub connects to 3 different systems, if we can reach it." "Vex," Kai's voice was soft, uncertain. When she turned to look at him, their faces were inches apart. "What happens after we expose all this? You go back to your people, I go back to mine." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Vexara found herself studying his features, the strong jaw, the gentle curve of his mouth, those impossible amber eyes that seemed to see through every defense she'd ever built. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything I've known, everything I've believed." She gestured helplessly. "You've turned my world upside down in a single evening." "Is that necessarily bad?" Kai asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Sometimes things need to be overturned to see what's really underneath." Their eyes held, and Vexara felt something fundamental shift inside her. For the first time in decades, she wasn't thinking like a commander. She was thinking like a woman who'd spent too many years believing that connection meant weakness. "Kai," she began, but her words were cut off by her comm unit buzzing. "Commander Vexara, this is Forward Base Alpha, requesting status update." She cursed in her native language, a harsh sound that made Kai smile despite the tension. "This is Vexara, continuing pursuit of intelligence leads, maintaining radio silence for surveillance purposes." "Acknowledged, Commander. Next check-in at 400 hours." As she terminated the connection, she found Kai watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The interruption had broken whatever moment was building between them, but the awareness remained, humming like static electricity in the air. You should rest, she said, gesturing to one of the narrow bunks. We have a long journey ahead of us. But instead of moving away, Kai stepped closer. Vexara, I need to know something. What you said earlier about risking everything for the truth. He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she was beginning to find endearing. Are you doing this just to stop the war, or is there something else? The directness of the question caught her off guard. In her culture, matters of the heart were rarely discussed so openly. But then, everything about this situation defied cultural norms. I don't know, she answered honestly. This afternoon, if someone had told me I'd be considering anything other than completing my mission, I'd have had them court-martialed. She met his gaze directly. But then, this afternoon, I hadn't looked into the eyes of someone who once risked his life for me, someone who's showing me that maybe everything I've been taught to believe is a lie. And now, Kai asked, moving closer still, what do you believe now? The question required a level of honesty that terrified her. But looking at Kai, this impossible bridge between their species, this remnant of innocence in a war-torn universe, she found herself unable to hide behind military protocol. I believe, she said slowly, that you're the most dangerous person I've ever met. Not because you're human, but because you're making me question everything I thought I knew about. Everything. Including what you thought you knew about yourself? Kai's hand moved to cup her cheek, the touch sending shock waves through her system. Human skin felt different than she'd expected, softer, warmer, alive with a different kind of energy than her own species. Especially that, she whispered. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively, an exploration of the unfamiliar becoming an acceptance of the inevitable. Kai's hands tangled in her red hair while hers pressed against the solid warmth of his chest. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and warfare giving way to something neither had expected to find. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Vexara's green skin had flushed to a deeper emerald, a physiological response she couldn't control. Kai's amber eyes were dark with an emotion that matched her own turbulent feelings. This is insane, she breathed. Completely, Kai agreed, but he didn't move away. We're from different species, fighting on opposite sides of a war, and I just kissed you like. Like what? She asked, genuinely curious. Like I've been wanting to for 30 years, even though I didn't remember you until today. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, sending shivers down her spine. Like you're the thing I didn't even know I was searching for. The honesty in his voice broke through her last defenses. Here in this forgotten outpost, with the weight of impending war and political conspiracies pressing down on them, Vexara made a choice that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. Show me, she said softly. Kai's eyes widened slightly, but then his expression gentled into something that looked like tenderness. Are you sure? Because once we cross this line... Everything's already changed, she interrupted. The war, my mission, my beliefs, maybe it's time I changed too. This time, their kiss was different, deeper, more urgent, filled with the recognition that this might be their only moment of peace in a universe designed to keep them apart. Kai's hands moved to the fastenings of her tactical gear, while hers explored the unfamiliar planes of his human body. You're beautiful, he murmured against her neck, pressing kisses to the pulse point there. Your skin feels like silk and scales combined. I never imagined. Neither did I, she admitted, gasping as his lips found a particularly sensitive spot near her collarbone. This is my first, with anyone not of my species. Mine too, Kai said, pulling back to look at her. Are you okay? We can stop if... Instead of answering with words, Vexara began unbuttoning his shirt, revealing the battle scars that marked his chest, some from weapons, others from the debris that had fallen when he'd protected her all those years ago. You still bear the marks, she whispered, tracing them with reverent fingers. So do you, he replied, indicating the crescent scar above her eye. We're both marked by that day, by saving each other. Their lovemaking that followed was tender and exploratory, a dance of discovery as they learned the rhythms of each other's bodies. Kai mapped the sensitive areas where her scales met skin, while Vexara marveled at the different texture and temperature of human flesh. They moved together with increasing passion, the walls between species dissolving in the face of something far more fundamental. Later, as they lay entwined on the narrow bunk, her green skin contrasting beautifully with his pale human form, Vexara felt a peace she'd never experienced. Her head rested on Kai's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "What have we done?" she murmured, not with regret but with wonder. "Maybe," Kai said, running his fingers through her tangled red hair. "We've just proven that some things are stronger than war." Vexara lifted her head to look at him. "My people will call it betrayal. Mine will say the same." His amber eyes were serious. "But Vexara, feeling this, being with you, it's the first real thing I've experienced in years. If we can't hope for understanding between us, what hope is there for our peoples?" She kissed him again, softly this time. "Tomorrow we expose the conspiracy. We try to end this war." "And after that?" Kai asked. "After that," Vexara considered the question. "After that, we see if love can really bridge the gap between stars." "Is that what this is?" Kai's voice held a note of hope. "Love." She thought of the little boy who'd risked everything to save her, of the man who'd shown her truths she didn't want to face, of the connection that had sparked between them despite every reason it shouldn't exist. "I think," she said carefully, "it might be the beginning of it." As the twin moons rose outside their window, casting silver light across their entangled forms, Commander Vexara realized that tomorrow would bring challenges that would test everything they'd discovered tonight. But for now, held in the arms of someone who saw past the war to the person beneath, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, some things were worth fighting for beyond duty and revenge. The comm unit on her tactical belt beeped once, a reminder of the world waiting outside their sanctuary. She silenced it with a touch, choosing to steal a few more moments of this impossible peace. Tomorrow they would try to save two worlds. Tonight they had saved each other. Dawn came too soon, filtering through the grimy windows of the outpost in pale gold streams. Vexara woke first, her warrior's instincts automatically scanning for threats before the events of the previous night crashed back into her consciousness. Kai's arm was draped across her waist, his breath warm against her neck. She allowed herself 30 seconds to savor the unfamiliar sensation of waking beside someone, to memorize the way his human warmth contrasted with her cooler Velnari physiology. Then reality reasserted itself. "Kai," she whispered, gently shaking his shoulder, "we need to move." His amber eyes opened immediately, alert despite the early hour. A smile tugged at his lips as he took in their entangled position. "Not a dream, then." "No," she confirmed, though her own lips curved slightly. "Not a dream, but we have work to do." As they dressed, the intimacy of the night before transformed into the efficiency of two operatives preparing for a mission. But there were differences now. Casual touches, meaningful glances, a harmony in their movements that spoke of newfound trust. Vexara checked her comm unit and frowned. "3 missed check-ins. My team will be mobilizing soon." "Mine too," Kai said, studying the data chip. "But first, we need to get this to someone who can actually do something with it. I have a contact, a journalist named Elena Vasquez. She's been investigating war profiteering for years." "And I know someone," Vexara admitted reluctantly. "General Thrixon. She's always questioned the ethics of our targeting protocols, if anyone in high command can be trusted." The comm unit suddenly blared to life. "Commander Vexara, this is Alpha Base. You've missed 3 consecutive check-ins. Report immediately or we will launch recovery operations." Vexara cursed. "Alpha Base, this is Vexara. I've encountered significant intelligence that requires immediate command attention. Requesting secure channel." "Denied, Commander. Your mission was termination, not intelligence gathering. Return to extraction point immediately." She looked at Kai, who had gone pale. They both knew what a recovery operation meant, a full military sweep of the area. Their window for subterfuge was closing. "We go with the original plan," she decided. "The maintenance tunnels to the spaceport, but we move now." They gathered their equipment quickly, the data chip securely stored in Vexara's tactical vest. As they prepared to leave, Kai caught her hand. "Whatever happens today," he said seriously, "last night. It wasn't just adrenaline or circumstance. You know that, right?" She turned to face him fully, seeing past the human features to the soul that had recognized hers across time and species. "I know. But Kai, what we're about to do, exposing this conspiracy, it's going to make us enemies to everyone we've ever known." "Then we'll face it together," he said simply. The journey through the underground maintenance tunnels was tense. Their footsteps echoed in the confined space, and more than once they had to duck into alcoves as patrol drones swept overhead. But Kai's knowledge of the colony's infrastructure proved invaluable. "There," he whispered, pointing to a junction ahead. "That leads directly to the commercial district of the spaceport. Alina's contact maintains a clinic there, neutral territory." As they approached the junction, Vexara's comm unit crackled ominously. "All units be advised. Commander Vexara is to be considered compromised. Lethal force authorized upon sight." Her scales rippled with shock. Already they considered her a traitor. "They're not wasting time." "Neither are mine," Kai said grimly, checking his own device. "Multiple units converging on the colony. Both sides are mobilizing." They reached the spaceport level just as the first explosions rocked the ground above them. Through a maintenance grate, they could see Velnari and human forces taking positions, preparing for what appeared to be a final, decisive battle. "The clinic," Vexara urged, "before they close off all routes." But as they emerged into the commercial district, they found themselves face to face with Lieutenant Jackson and a full squad of Velnari soldiers. "Commander," Jackson said, his weapon trained on her chest, "step away from the human." "Lower your weapons," she ordered, but the command that had once been automatic now fell on deaf ears. "You've been declared a traitor, Vexara, fraternizing with humans, abandoning your mission." Jackson's expression was pained. "I served with you for 10 years, don't make me do this." From behind them came the sound of human military boots. Kai tensed as soldiers in colonial military gear surrounded their position, weapons drawn. "Drop your weapons," a human sergeant barked. "All of you." They were trapped, two species that had trusted each other facing off over two people who had dared to cross the divide. "Wait," Vexara stepped forward, hands slightly raised. "Listen to me, all of you. The war, your war, it's been manipulated. Both sides have been played by your own leadership." "Vilnari lies," the human sergeant spat. "Human propaganda," Jackson countered. "No," Kai said firmly. He pulled out the data chip, holding it where everyone could see. "Evidence. Proof that your generals and our commanders have been working together to keep this war going. They've been sacrificing your people, all of our people, for their own gain." "Show them," Vexara said to Kai, then turned to her former subordinate. "Jackson, you've questioned the orders before. You've wondered why we only hit civilian targets, why the humans always seemed to know when we were coming to their military installations." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the lieutenant's face. The human sergeant was similarly wavering. "Stand down." No one said anything about standing down. "Just listen," Kai pleaded. He activated a portable display showing the data from the chip. Communication logs, financial transactions, strategic planning sessions where both sides' leaders had coordinated attacks to maximize hatred and minimize actual military losses. As the evidence played out before them, weapons slowly began to lower. Velnari and human soldiers looked at each other with growing confusion and anger, but not at each other, at their leaders. "This can't be real," someone muttered. "My brother died in the Gamma Sector raid," a human soldier said. "Are you telling me it was orchestrated?" "My mate died defending our colony," a Velnari warrior added, scales flushing with rage. "Because our own generals wanted them to." The standoff was transforming into something else entirely. Soldiers from both sides began to lower their weapons, questioning, arguing among themselves about the implications of what they were seeing. "Commander," Jackson said slowly, "if this is true." "It is true," Vexara confirmed. "And there's more. Right now, your true leaders are probably giving orders for a final push. Maximum casualties. They want to end this war with so much blood that no one will question the peace terms they've already negotiated in secret. A peace that keeps them in power," Kai added. "A peace that maintains the military-industrial complex both species have built." An alarm suddenly pierced the air. "Incoming artillery," someone shouted. "All units take cover." As soldiers scattered, Vexara found herself moving instinctively toward Kai. They took shelter behind an overturned vendor cart as the first rounds impacted around them. "We need to get this data transmitted," she shouted over the noise, "before they turn this spaceport into rubble." "The communications tower," Kai pointed, "if we can reach it." They ran, ducking explosions and returned fire. But as they ran, something extraordinary happened. Soldiers from both sides began to follow them. Jackson appeared at Vexara's flank, providing covering fire. The human sergeant covered Kai's approach to the tower. "Cover them," someone shouted. "Whatever they're trying to do, it's worth more than this pointless fighting." Together, a mixed group of former enemies fought their way to the communications station. As Kai worked to access the transmission equipment, Vexara found herself fighting alongside Jackson against incoming fire from both their own forces and human loyalists. "Almost there," Kai called out, his fingers flying over the controls. "I'm patching into both military networks." "Vexara," Jackson warned. She turned to see a squad of Velnari elite approaching, her own mentor, General Crixvan, leading them. "Stand down, Commander," Crixvan ordered. "You're sabotaging years of careful planning." "Careful planning to kill our own people," she retorted, her weapon raised. "How many, General? How many died for your profit?" "For the greater good," he snarled. "For the survival of our species." "No," Vexara said firmly. "For your power." The standoff might have lasted longer, but Kai's voice suddenly rang out over both species' communication networks. "This is Kai Thompson, former diplomatic attaché, with Commander Vexara of the Velnari military. We have evidence of a conspiracy at the highest levels of both our governments. Please receive this data before more of our people die for a lie." As the information flooded through both military networks, the fighting around them began to slow, then stop entirely. Weapons lowered as soldiers on both sides processed what they were seeing. General Crixvan's expression shifted from anger to calculation. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly. "We've told the truth," Vexara replied, "maybe for the first time in 40 years. The comm networks exploded with chatter. Questions, angry demands, calls for ceasefire. The carefully orchestrated battle was collapsing into chaos as soldiers realized they'd been manipulated. "You've ruined everything," Crixvan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We've ended it," Kai corrected, moving to stand beside Vexara. "All of it, the lies, the manipulation, the needless death." The general looked at them, a Velnari commander and a human diplomat standing united against the machine of war, and something in his posture shifted. Defeat, perhaps, but also a kind of relief. "This isn't over," he said, but he holstered his weapon. "There will be courts-martial, trials. Both sides have invested too much in this war to simply walk away." "Then we'll face them," Vexara said, "together." As if in response to her words, a new voice came through the comm networks. "This is Admiral Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force and General Thrixon of the Velnari Fleet Command. We are declaring an immediate ceasefire pending investigation of the evidence provided. All commanders, stand down your forces." The transformation was immediate. Weapons fell silent across the colony. Soldiers from both sides emerged from cover, looking at each other with new eyes, not as enemies but as fellow victims of a greater deception. Jackson approached Vexara and Kai. "Commander, what are your orders?" She looked at him, then at the mixed group of soldiers waiting for direction. "Help anyone who's wounded, regardless of species. Begin organizing temporary shelters, and inform all units that anyone who continues hostilities will answer to me personally." "Yes, Commander," he saluted, then added more quietly, "Thank you for having the courage to do what was right." As Jackson moved to implement her orders, Vexara felt Kai's hand slip into hers. Around them, former enemies were helping wounded, sharing supplies, talking tentatively about the future. "We did it," he said softly. "We started it," she corrected. "The real work begins now." "Together?" he asked, echoing his words from the outpost. She looked at him, her former enemy, her unexpected savior, her impossible love. Together. Above them, the sun of the human colony shone down on a scene that would have been unimaginable just days before. Velnari and humans working side by side, united in the knowledge that they had been played against each other for decades. The war wasn't over. There would be recriminations, investigations, diplomatic challenges. But for the first time in 40 years, there was hope. And standing in the center of it all, Commander Vexara and Kai Thompson had become the bridge between worlds they hadn't known they were meant to be. The revolution had begun not with weapons, but with truth. And perhaps, in time, love might be what sustained the peace. 6 months later, the diplomatic conclave of New Geneva Station was a symbol of everything that had changed. Built at the precise point between human and Velnari space, The station represented more than just a neutral meeting ground. It was proof that cooperation was possible. Vexara stood before the full assembly, her commander's uniform now bearing the insignia of the Joint Peace Corps rather than the Velnari military. Beside her, Kai wore similar attire, his diplomatic credentials expanded to include interspecies relations specialist. "The tribunal has concluded its investigation," Vexara announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. 47 individuals from both species have been found guilty of conspiracy to perpetuate warfare, including General Crixvan and General Tors. A murmur ran through the assembly. It had taken months of careful investigation, but the evidence they'd uncovered had been irrefutable. The architects of the war had been exposed and would face justice. However, Kai continued, the tribunal recognizes that many soldiers on both sides acted in good faith, believing they were protecting their peoples. No military personnel will face punishment for actions taken before the ceasefire. As they finished the formal announcement, Vexara caught Kai's eye. A slight smile passed between them, a private moment in a very public setting. The months since their revelation had been exhausting, filled with testimonies, negotiations, and the careful work of building trust between species. Later, in the privacy of their shared quarters on the station, they finally had a moment alone. "Think it will stick?" Kai asked, pulling Vexara close. "The peace." She settled into his embrace, marveling as she still did at how perfectly they fit together despite their physical differences. "It has to. Too many people on both sides know the truth now, and the new generation." She gestured toward a data pad showing images of the station's education center, where young Velnari and humans learn together. "They're learning to see past the propaganda." "Speaking of new generations," Kai said, his voice taking on a different tone. He reached into his pocket, producing a small box. "I've been waiting for the right moment." Vexara's heart, yes, she had learned it was possible for hearts to race in anticipation, beat faster as he dropped to one knee. "Vexara, we've broken every rule, defied every expectation, and somehow found each other across the void between worlds. Will you marry me? By human custom, Velnari tradition, or any combination thereof." She stared at the ring, a unique design combining a human diamond with a Velnari crystal that glowed softly in the station's ambient light. Her scales shifted to their deepest emerald, betraying her emotional state. "According to Velnari tradition," she said slowly, "I should consult my family's matriarch. According to human custom, you should have asked my father's permission." She paused, watching his expression fall slightly. "But since we've never done anything by tradition before." She pulled him up and kissed him thoroughly before whispering, "Yes." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. The wedding was planned as a joint celebration, incorporating traditions from both species. More importantly, it would be the first formal interspecies marriage since the war began, broadcast throughout both territories as a symbol of the new era. The day itself dawned with both suns rising perfectly aligned, a rare celestial event that the station's astronomers had calculated to coincide with the ceremony. The main assembly hall had been transformed into something breathtaking. Velnari crystal formations twined with human flowering vines, creating a garden that belonged to both worlds and neither. Vexara wore a gown that blended traditional Velnari battle regalia with flowing human silk, a warrior's strength softened by diplomatic grace. Her red hair had been braided with small crystals that chimed softly as she moved. Kai waited at the altar in formal diplomatic attire that incorporated Velnari design elements. When their eyes met across the aisle, everything else faded away. Not the assembled dignitaries from both species, not the historical significance of the moment, just the man who had reminded her what it meant to trust, to hope, to love. Admiral Chen, representing humanity, and General Thrixon, representing the Velnari, jointly officiated. The ceremony began with the traditional Velnari pledge of protection, where Vexara placed her hand weapon on the altar beside Kai's hand in symbolic trust. It continued with human vows of love and partnership. But when it came time for their personal vows, tradition gave way to truth. "Kai," Vexara said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her, "you saved me twice. Once when we were children, and again when I had forgotten how to see past hatred. You showed me that some bonds transcend species, politics, and war. You taught me that strength isn't just in fighting, but in choosing when not to." She paused, looking directly into his amber eyes. "I vow to stand beside you as we build a future neither of our peoples could have imagined alone." Kai cleared his throat, emotion thick in his voice. "Vexara, when I found you again in those ruins, I thought I was completing a military mission. Instead, I found the missing piece of myself. You challenged everything I thought I knew and showed me what real courage looks like." His hand found hers, intertwining their fingers, pale human skin against emerald scales. "I vow to honor your strength, share your dreams, and love you beyond the boundaries of worlds." As they exchanged rings, her Velnari crystal band and his human gold, the assembled guests seemed to fade away. It was just them, making promises that would ripple outward to reshape how two species understood each other. "By the authority vested in us by both the human colonial government and the Velnari conclave," Admiral Chen declared, "we pronounce you bonded in law, custom, and heart." The celebration that followed was unlike anything either species had seen. Velnari war chants blended with human music as former enemies danced together. Jackson, now promoted to lead the joint military training initiatives, gave a toast that had everyone laughing about the tactical inefficiencies of falling in love during a war. But the most moving moment came when the children from the station's integrated education center, a mix of human and Velnari youth who had never known the war, performed a song they had composed themselves. The lyrics, in both languages, spoke of two stars finding each other across the vast darkness, creating light that showed others the way home. As Vexara and Kai watched the children sing, she felt his hand tighten around hers. "Look what we started," he murmured. "Look what will continue," she corrected. Later that night, in their quarters now designated as the official residence of the Peace Corps primary liaison officers, they finally had a moment of quiet. Vexara stood by the window, still in her wedding gown, watching the stars wheel past as the station rotated. "Any regrets?" Kai asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, fitting perfectly into the curve of his body. "About defying my entire military command, about choosing love over species loyalty, about marrying someone my people once considered an enemy." She turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Not a single one." "Good," he said, "because I have news that might complicate things even further." She raised an eyebrow, a distinctly human expression she'd adopted. "More complicated than ending a 40-year war and getting married across species lines." Kai pulled out a data pad, his expression a mix of excitement and nerves. "The medical team's been running compatibility studies for potential interspecies reproduction. The technology exists, and they've been developing protocols." Vexara's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Kai, are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," he said carefully, "that maybe someday if you wanted we could try for children. Half human, half Velnari, the first of their kind." For a moment she couldn't speak. The idea was staggering, children who would belong to both worlds and neither, growing up in a universe where such things were possible. "The biological challenges alone," she began, "would be significant," he agreed. "And there's no guarantee it would work, but Vexara, the symbolism alone, children who embody the peace we're building." She kissed him to stop his nervous rambling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to considering it, or yes to—" "Yes to everything," she clarified. "To children who will know a better universe than we did, to a future where Velnari and human children play together, to hope." As they stood together, looking out at the stars that had once divided their peoples but now marked the space between their worlds, Vexara marveled at the journey that had led them here. From that child she'd been, cowering in the ruins, to the commander who had been ready to complete a genocide, to the woman who had chosen love over hatred, every step had led to this moment. "Do you think they'll write songs about us?" Kai asked, only half joking. "The alien commander and the human diplomat who fell in love and stopped a war." "Probably," Vexara said with a laugh. "And they'll get most of it wrong. They'll make it seem like it was easy, like we knew all along what we were doing, instead of stumbling through it, making it up as we went." "Exactly." She turned serious for a moment. "But Kai, what we found, what we proved, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't destiny or fate or any of those romantic notions." "What was it then?" She considered the question, thinking of all they'd lost and gained, of the courage it had taken to see past a lifetime of conditioning. of the moment when she'd chosen to trust rather than kill. It was choice, she said finally. Every day, every moment, choosing to see the person instead of the enemy, choosing hope over hatred, choosing love over fear. And will we keep choosing it? She smiled, gesturing to the wedding bands they wore, to the mixed crew visible through the window, to the children's drawings taped to their wall depicting a future where green-skinned and pale-skinned figures stood hand in hand. Every day, she promised, until it becomes as natural as breathing. As the station's artificial night cycle dimmed the lights, they moved together toward their shared bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the ongoing peace negotiations, the integration of military forces, the complex work of rebuilding trust between civilizations. But tonight was theirs. Mrs. Thompson, Kai said teasingly, using the human honorific. Commander Vexara Thompson, she corrected with a grin. But only in official documentation, to you always just Vex. They settled into bed together, and as Vexara drifted off to sleep in Kai's arms, she had one final thought. The war that had defined her life was over. The peace she and Kai had sparked was just beginning, and somewhere in the quiet space between stars, two hearts beat in the rhythm of a love that had bridged the impossible. In the years that followed, historians would note that the 40-year war ended not with a bang, but with a choice. Two people choosing to see each other rather than the uniform, choosing truth over propaganda, choosing love over a lifetime of taught hatred. And if those historians had been present that night, watching Commander Vexara and Kai Thompson sleep beneath the light of both their world's stars, they might have understood something even more profound. That sometimes the smallest acts of courage, a child risking punishment to save someone different, a soldier lowering their weapon, a heart opening despite every reason not to, these are the moments that reshape galaxies. The war was over. The future was just beginning, and it started with two people who had looked across the vast space between worlds and chosen to build a bridge. 5 years later, the playground at New Geneva Station's family sector echoed with laughter in multiple languages as children of various species played together. Among them, a toddler with pale green skin and wavy auburn hair ran on chubby legs toward her parents. "Mama, Papa," little Era called, her arms outstretched. Vexara caught their daughter up in her arms while Kai wrapped them both in a hug. Their child, the first human Vilnari hybrid ever born, was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. Her scales shimmered with emotion just like her mother's, but her eyes were the same amber as her father's. "Look what she drew today," Kai said, producing a colorful picture. It showed 3 figures, one green, one pale, one in between, standing beneath a sky full of stars. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, Ara had written, "My family." Vexara studied the drawing, then looked at their daughter, who was already squirming to get down and play more. "What do you think?" Kai asked, ready for another. She smiled, placing her hand on her still flat stomach. "I think our family is just getting started." As they watched Ara run back to her multi-species friend group, Vexara leaned into Kai's embrace. The war was a chapter in history now, taught in schools as a cautionary tale. But here, in the laughter of children who saw differences as interesting rather than frightening, in the easy cooperation of former enemies, in the love that had sparked between two impossible hearts, here was the real revolution. It hadn't been easy. There had been resistance from both sides, political complications, and moments when the peace had seemed fragile as glass. But they had persevered, building bridges with patience, understanding, and an unshakable faith in the possibility of something better. "Any regrets?" Kai asked, their old question now a joke between them. Vexara watched their daughter play, felt the new life growing within her, and thought of all the choices that had led them here. "Just one," she said. He looked at her in surprise. "I regret," she said with a grin, "that it took us 30 years to find each other again." Kai laughed, pulling her closer. "Then let's make sure we don't waste any more time." As the artificial sunset painted the station's sky in shades of gold and purple, the Thompson family headed home together. Behind them, children of a dozen species played beneath the light of distant stars, building a future that their parents had once thought impossible. The war between humans and Vilnari had lasted 40 years, but the peace they built together would last for generations. And it all began with two people who had looked past the uniform to see the soul, who had chosen love over fear, who had believed that some bonds transcend species, politics, and war. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all.